We've all been there. The washing machine is beyond repair. And all you want to know is which new model you should buy. Well, that's where the Which Just Buy This recommendations come in. Hand-picked recommendations that our product testing experts think you should buy. We've got over 50 products with a Just Buy This recommendation, from dishwashers to TVs, cordless vacuums to fitness trackers. And yes, it can be useful to spend time reading our in-depth reviews, but when you need a quick fix, a Just Buy This recommendation can save the day. To find out which products have our new seal of approval, just head to which.co.uk/justbuythis. That's which.co.uk/justbuythis. And get it right with Which.
Having your identity used without your permission is far from ideal, and the consequences could last a lot longer than you'd expect. Welcome to this podcast from Which. Hello and welcome to this episode of Which Money. It's James here sitting in for Lucia Ariano again this week. But thankfully it's not just me here in the Which studio. From Which, our fraud and scams expert Faye Lipson. Hello, how are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you.
Nice to have you back with us. And for the first time on the Which Money podcast, Steve Goddard from financial crime prevention firm Featurespace. Steve, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Likewise. I'm going to start with you, Faye, because you've written a great piece called The Changing Face of ID Fraud for the latest issue of Which Money magazine. Do you want to just give us an idea into how fraud has been changing, or specifically ID fraud has been changing over, I guess, the last few years or so?
Sure. So a couple of years back, I did a piece on the kind of the new kind of never-ending nature of ID fraud, in which we have this traditional idea that ID fraud, it happens to you, might happen intensively over the course of a few months, that lots of accounts get opened in your name, and then the fraudster moves on from your identity and it's over. But what we found was that there were lots of people where they were being targeted repeatedly over the course of months or even years. We had one case which was going on for 4 years, which was awful for the victim. So that's a really significant change that's happened in recent years. And then even more recently than that, we're seeing fraudsters getting quite creative with the kinds of targets. So the kind of traditional accounts that people are trying to open are bank accounts, credit cards, loans, things like that. Things where the target is obvious. You know, they're perhaps trying to, get access to a credit facility. But we're now seeing quite unusual targets like mobile phone contracts or savings accounts. And we're also seeing a lot of account takeover where people's existing mobile phone contract or their Amazon account get taken over. So there's lots of things happening, and the fraudsters are kind of being very agile and changing their tactics very quickly in this space.
And the number of cases is on the up as well. It's not that just that they're trying new techniques, it's the number of actual cases on the up as well. Absolutely.
So I think there were nearly 250,000 cases reported to the fraud prevention database CIFAS in 2024. So that's huge. That's more than half of all of the cases that get reported to them, and it was up by 5% on the previous year. So it's really dominated the overall fraud picture for some time, and that shows no sign of changing, unfortunately.
And just backtracking for a moment, you mentioned traditionally fraudsters might try and get a credit card in somebody else's name or get a loan taken out in somebody else's name. I guess what they're trying to do there is just get their hands on some money that isn't theirs, and they don't necessarily have to pay it back. That's the straightforward nature of that, right?
Yeah, that's very much the case. And yes, one of the most common products, in fact, I believe the most common product for this type of fraud is bank accounts. It's often the case that overdrafts are targeted, but it can also be the case that the accounts are kind of desired for money muling activity. So it will provide a useful conduit for fraudsters to channel money that they've stolen from people through to launder it, basically. So those are the most common reasons.
And remind us what you mean by money muling.
Sure. So this is when somebody is essentially recruited to offer their bank account to fraudsters, and they'll receive money in, which is often money that's been paid in by a scam victim, thinking that they're receiving some sort of service. And they'll pay that money in, and they'll pay it to the details of the money mule. The money mule will ask no questions and will forward it on to the actual fraudster, so that it's kind of breaks the link between the victim and the perpetrator. Sometimes the money mule knows what they're up to. They know that they're involved in fraud, but very often they've just kind of been a bit gullible or naive, I suppose, and they've just accepted money for the use of their bank account and haven't really asked the right questions.
And Steve, based on what Faye has been telling us there, do you think fraudsters are they getting more sophisticated, or do you think just they're generally diversifying a bit more?
Generally diversifying. So fraudsters will do what works. If it works, if it's simple, then they will continue doing that. If there is a good return of investment for them, then why change? If it works, and again, it can work in different regions as well, in different countries, and that what we're seeing now, and what we've always seen really, is fraud migrates. So as soon as some country, region, bank, whoever puts up controls, maybe the education is improved, then they will move somewhere else where there isn't that knowledge, that experience. So you've got the from an ID theft perspective, you've got the historical, going through your bins, looking for your bank statements with your name and address and details on there. So that still happens. But as technology improves and has got more sophisticated, it's a lot more. You're able to scale that. You're able to scrape information off the internet. You're able to share information. The fraudsters are able to share information a lot more easily, and being able to, like I said, be able to scale that whole process a lot more than just somebody nipping into your bins, finding a bank statement, and setting up an account in your name. And it's like Faye said, it's the effectively they want money at the end of it. So it's setting up a credit card or a phone contract, very simply. But it's also building up good credit. So these could be dormant for a number of years, or they look like genuine activity for a period of months and years, and then that's when something happens. So they look like a really good customer. They pay their bills on time. Credit gets extended to them, so they can get more and more money. So they're playing the long game as well as the short. So it's a very sophisticated, complex kind of. Fraud doesn't look like one thing. It looks like a lot of different things. So you're also always kind of keeping an eye on the very simple techniques, things that have been there around there for decades. I've worked in fraud for 20 years now. Some things haven't changed. Some things have. So your day-to-day job is it just gets broader and broader every day. The more technology exists, the more techniques kind of get perfected over time. You're constantly kind of facing this kind of ongoing battle.
As you say, you have worked in this industry for a long time, as an expert, I should say, not as a fraudster yourself.
Thank you for clarification. Yes.
But you were a victim, which sounds like a brutal term, but you were, right?
Yes, it's not. It shouldn't be a brutal term. I am in a position where I am confident and not happy to say, but I'm willing to go out and say that I have been a victim of identity fraud. Part of there is a huge amount of stigma around being the victim of fraud, and terminology and wording that we use around it. So I feel that in my position, I have the experience, and I am able to say, actually, fraud does happen. Fraud can happen to anyone. Me as a quote expert, it can still happen to somebody like me, no matter what things I put in place. How careful I am with my details. I shred any documentation. I make sure you take labels off your Amazon packages with your name and address on it. All of the things like that. You can do everything in the world, but actually, everyone is susceptible to being a victim at some point in their life, unfortunately.
So take us back to the moment it happened. What happened, and when did it happen, and how did you find out?
So there's been a couple of different things. There's been a few things that have happened to me. So initially, I got a letter from Companies House congratulating me on becoming a director of a company in Wales.
Right.
Which was a massive surprise to me. And that followed a couple of letters from a couple of banks to say, the first one said that my bank account had been closed due to the suspicious activity that had been seen on that account. What followed was another letter congratulating me on the opening of a new savings account. So savings accounts are slightly different because you're not applying for credit, so it won't show on your credit score.
And presumably you check your credit score regularly, hence why you didn't spot this come up.
Yes, yeah. I've been working in the industry. This is the advice we give other people. So you're racking your brain saying, this is what I tell other people to do all the time. What do I need to do myself? And yes, I keep an eye on my credit report, making sure everything looks fine. But because it was a savings account, because you're not applying for credit, it doesn't show up. Sometimes it shows up as a soft check, but it doesn't flag to say, you've applied for credit, blah, 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 this is your name and address. Which kind of goes into to Faye's point around the mule accounts. These accounts are being set up for the purposes of muling, transferring money being that point in between the scammer and them taking their money away. There's been a couple of incidents subsequently as well. So van insurance was taken out in my name. I don't have a van, so that was an immediate kind of red flag. But that one's a great example because I had the registration number of the van in question, so I could pass that on to Action Fraud and the police to take forward with. And again, recently I had another flag to say a check was done to open a credit card in my name. I phoned the institution and they confirmed that no account was set up and it didn't progress. Because after the first couple, I actually put my name. I requested to have my name on the CFAS list. So anything that does flag up like that will flag to them to say, this person has been the victim of fraud. Take extra care going forward. So yeah, that was my experience, and happy to share that and tell people and advise people of what I did, and just kind of get the word out so people aren't afraid to come forward and kind of report this as well.
Yeah, it's really important, isn't it, that people, especially in your circumstances, are happy to go on the record and say, look, if it can happen to me, then it can happen to you. And Faye, you speak to a lot of people all the time who are also in Steve's position where they're victims as well.
Absolutely. As Steve said, there's really no blame attached. It really can happen to anyone. It doesn't mean that you've been the weak point. Very often that your data may have been in a data breach with a company that's not your responsibility at all, or they've got other ways of scraping it off the web, or if you're on company's house anyway because you're a company director or company officer, then you're very much more exposed. So yes, it's really common, and we see victims from all walks of life, including people who are very careful, very knowledgeable about this issue.
And Steve, just to go back to you quickly, you mentioned you'd asked for your name to be put on a list. Remind us what that was, and can other people do that as well?
Yes, so that's the CIFAS list, CIFAS. So you can go online and you can request to have your details on there. The institutions that I actually spoke to, they did the same thing. So you can ask to be on that list. You speak to the the institutions in question, or you can kind of request to do that yourself. So that's a good step. Like Faye said at the very beginning, this could go on for years, for months. Who knows? So it's good to kind of have that reassurance to know that there is something in place to protect you. You still check your credit score. Sign up for all the bureaus that you can. Sometimes you get it free with your bank account. So just kind of build it into your kind of your regular routine to kind of check those things and keep on top of it.
Going back to the examples of you being a victim, why were you a victim so many times? Is it a case of once a fraudster has your details, they're going to try and exploit as much as they can?
Because it worked. Different groups were using it. The company's house group. It was my name and my address. That was all that was needed to set up the bank accounts. It was my name and my address. The email address and the phone number and the date of birth were all different, but that didn't mean anything. They had a name and they had an address, and that name, my name, is registered at this address on the electoral roll. So that's an in for them. They can stick in a different email address and phone number because they kind of want the communication to go there. But it worked. They had success. They tried it, and it worked. There was an account which they could use. If they tried it and it didn't work, then they move on to the next one.
So I think this is a really good point. So there's this traditional idea, I suppose, in identity fraud prevention that fraudsters kind of use your identity over a short space of time, and then the banks kind of wise up to it, and then they move on, and then you're not a victim of identity fraud anymore, and you don't need to be so vigilant anymore. And that's, in my experience, that's sadly no longer the case, if it ever was. We see actually that people's identities don't lose value to fraudsters over the time. they gain value because they've been proven to work, as Steve says, and so they just gain in value. And every time one avenue is closed off, like, for example, you go on the CIFAS register, and all of the industries that tend to check that, such as the financial industries, that might be closed off to you, but then they're going to try perhaps something a bit different. They'll try perhaps a savings account or something that doesn't perform quite the high level of checks that a bank account with a credit facility might do. They're going to branch off into different industries. You might see gambling accounts set up in your name, online gaming accounts, things like that. And so what we see is that it can go on for a very long time. And CIFAS protective registration lasts for 2 years, which you would hope would be enough. But I have seen cases go on for longer than that. And in some cases, people might need to sign up again if they're still experiencing fraud.
It's pretty scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is, though, isn't it? I mean, just the the list of things you mentioned there, it almost seems like an endless list of targets for each and every one of us.
And the digitisation of the world, it means that, when was the last time you got paper bank statements?
Oh, yes, it might even be a decade.
It doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
You get emails, you get SMSs, and I mean, luckily I got these 2 letters, but that was rare. Well, the first one, I didn't get a letter to say the account was opened, only that it was closed. Luckily, the second one, it was a letter to say it opened. But they could have, and I've had this with other kind of genuine. I was getting a SIM card for my daughter, and I was logging in through my account. And at one point, they asked if I wanted the confirmation to go to a different email address. And that's a great example of where if I was a fraudster, then I could go in and add a different email address to that, and then that goes somewhere else. And I, as the original account holder, isn't aware that that's happened.
Yeah, and fraudsters, they have forums, don't they, where they share tips about which providers do things like this, and they share those vulnerabilities with each other, so that the process gets refined over time. And it's pretty scary stuff.
They're looking for weak spots, aren't they?
Absolutely.
So this is where I get to use my favourite analogy. I love a film analogy. So I when I talk about this, I liken it, again, it shows my age, to Jurassic Park. So the very first one, not any of the subsequent films. But the raptors are testing the cages, the fences, to see if they're electrified or not. If they are, they'll move on to the next one. Fraudsters and scammers are exactly the same thing. They get to a point, and if they get stopped, they'll go somewhere else. They'll try something else. If they get stopped there, they'll go somewhere else. There's money to be made. There's a good return of investment for them here. So it is in their best interest to find a way through, and they will. And like Faye said, they will share that level of information. Their collaboration, unfortunately, puts Al in the genuine world to shame sometimes.
It's a good analogy, by the way.
Thank you very much.
And we will remember it further
you.
on from today. Can we talk about telecom fraud? Because again, in your piece, Faye, in big, bold letters, it said telecoms fraud is on the rise.
Yeah, that's right. So this is really lucrative for fraudsters, isn't it? Because if they can use some innocent person's identity and take out a mobile phone contract, they can often get, for example, the latest iPhone shipped out, and that could be worth, more than £1,000 in many cases, and they'll intercept that. And then the poor person whose name has been used on the account kind of ends up in the firing line. Like, we've sent this out, it's been received. Are you telling us that you didn't do that? And that's exactly what's happened. We've got a case study, a really stressful experience for a lady that found that the mobile phone company that had sent out a phone in her name didn't really believe her when she said she hadn't received it.
This is the case of Elaine, isn't it?
That's right.
I was reading this a little bit earlier on, and she felt as if Virgin Media were almost trying to catch her out because she felt as if they didn't believe what she was telling them.
Yes, she said that during one of the many phone calls she had to try and sort this out, she said that one of the Virgin Mobile employees actually said to her, "Look, I believe you, but my colleagues in the fraud team don't," which is a horrible position to be in. And what transpired in her case is that somehow fraudsters had obtained a picture of her door and possibly edited it to make it look like a parcel had been left there, and uploaded that so that it looked for all the world to Virgin Mobile like that the correct address had received this phone. But the only reason she feels that she could prove her innocence was that actually she had repainted that door in the last year. And so it looks like the fraudsters may have taken the picture of the door from Google Maps, like a slightly outdated image of the door. And she told us that she felt that was how she was able to prove her innocence, due to the sheer fluke of having repainted the door. But Virgin Media disputed that. They said that, you know, if the door had still been the same colour, they would have continued to investigate and they would have got to the bottom of it eventually. But nonetheless, that's a really stressful experience for someone. And that's, you know, this type of fraud is really on the rise. So
it's a really good example because, again, back to, when I first started in fraud 20 years ago, I used to investigate direct debit fraud for a bank, and that's exactly what we saw. We saw phone contracts being opened in people's names. A phone would be shipped out, then, you know, they would sell the phone because it holds a lot of value, and then just be left with a direct debit payment. And then there would be the investigation. You claim as, you know, I didn't open this account, and then, you know, they would have to go through the refunding of their direct debit payments. Yeah. So it's a great example of things haven't necessarily changed. The attack has maintained the same, but the scale of it has increased.
Absolutely. Yeah, so it's not quite doubled, but almost. So these kinds of telecoms impersonations have increased by 73% in a year. So that's huge, absolutely huge. And then an adjacent form of fraud that we're seeing is where it's an account takeover type of fraud, where it will typically start where people will receive a fake phone call offering them an upgrade from somebody posing as their network, and the person will give them all the details of their account, and then that fraudster will take those details and actually, you know, compromise the victim's account or register a new account for themselves. So that's quite common as well. But yes, these telecoms contracts and products are really in favour with identity fraudsters right now.
And with that example you just gave there, it shows a very direct link between the fraudster and the victim. You know, that's a phone call between the victim and the fraudster.
Absolutely.
But for other cases, I guess for a lot of victims, they just don't know how they became a victim. Like for Elaine, for example.
Exactly.
I guess she has no idea how or why she was targeted.
It can be exactly that. It can be a kind of jigsaw of different things. So it could be a few details lifted from social media. It could be a few details lifted from a data breach for the same person, or, you know, scraped from other sources and just pieced together to make a more complete picture of that person's identity.
And just to say, just to make sure we give Virgin Media's point of view as well, they said that they work hard to tackle fraud and will always work closely with individuals who report such activity to investigate what happened and, where required, ensure correct action is taken. Off the back of that, Steve, do you think that companies almost need to do more to protect their own customers?
This is a difficult one. I think that the perception from an outside view is, yes, they need to do more, but there often isn't the visibility of the huge amount of work that does take place. These institutions do. You know, fraud is a big part of any kind of business. You know, they spend a lot of money. There is a lot of overhead from the individuals doing the investigation, the software that they use, the solutions. There is a lot there, and we talk about all of the negatives, all of the unfortunate victims. You know, myself, one of them as well, and I can say that from my point of view. But there's also a huge amount of people who didn't become victims because of all the work that these organisations do in the background. We hear about all the bad stuff that happens, and that's terrible. We always want to reduce that. But there is also a huge amount of work done to protect a lot of people, to stop them becoming victims too.
Because do either of you, I imagine both of you, speak to a lot of people who tell you, I think I was almost about to be scammed and then I spotted something, or they might tell you a story about how they were scammed, and, you know, getting in touch with the company involved was a nice, easy process and things got resolved pretty quickly. Is that fair to say as well?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's also fair to say that kind of different industries are at different points along this journey. So I think it's fairly uncontroversial to say that banks are kind of much further along in this journey than some other industries are. And actually, the banking industry, UK finance, has expressed its frustration with other industries that perhaps not as far along as they are. So yes, it really kind of depends which industry you're talking about in some ways as well.
Yeah, there isn't a silver bullet. It isn't one group's responsibility. It's not my responsibility. It's not the banks. It's not the telecoms companies. It's everybody's responsibility to do what they can. Law enforcement as well. Everybody is kind of struggling with budgets and finances and availability and resources, because, like we've said, fraud has increased massively, and sometimes you don't have the same resources that you used to have. It's tough, and you're spinning all these plates, and you're trying to keep your head above water and make sure you're protecting everybody, but it's difficult.
And for AI is just complicating this matter even more, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it just it enables the fraudsters to send out the kinds of phishing, really highly convincing and accurate looking phishing attacks that gather so much of this stolen data that can then be funneled into this type of identity crime. So yeah, it enables them to kind of create hugely compelling looking emails that look like they're from government agencies or bailiffs, debt collectors or whatever, that actually cite the correct legislation and use industry jargon and terminology. Even though the fraudster doesn't know it themselves, they can just ask AI to put it in. And that's why it's just easier than ever for fraudsters to kind of make these big phishing expeditions for this kind of data, and that's why they're going to carry on, because the barriers to entry are lower than ever before.
And fake IDs as well. Just how easy is it for a fraudster to sit and generate a fake ID of me or you, for example? Yeah,
so that's an interesting one. So from speaking to experts on this, what I've learned is that if you were to just ask, for example, an AI image generator or chat GPT or something to create a fake ID for you, it looks rubbish. It's really unconvincing. But what fraudsters actually do is they layer on different technologies. So they'll have coding, they'll have templates, they'll have AI, and they can create really convincing kind of digital images of like driver's licenses, for example, this way, especially if they have managed to steal or trick you into giving a digital image of your genuine driving license. So what they can do is they've got that, say they've tricked you into thinking that you're speaking to the DVLA or something, and they've managed to obtain that from you. What they can do is then kind of bring all their tricks into play, image editing, coding, and layered templates and AI to swap your photo for their photo, but then keep all of your details. So then they can kind of use that as a form of entry to online bank accounts and things like that. So it's really scary, and it's one of the reasons why it's so important, I suppose, just to keep hold of your physical wallet. It sounds like really old school advice, but it's really important. And also just to, if you ever kind of receive a request via email, or if you're on a website that seems to be asking you to submit an image of your identity documents, just think really carefully, like, how do I know that this is genuinely who I think I'm interacting with, and just stop and verify it, because there are many, many fake websites out there impersonating government agencies, banks, and all kinds of institutions, really.
And Steve, how quickly do you think this is going to continue to evolve, especially with AI now? It just develops so quickly in itself, but putting that on top of ID fraud, just where are we going to go with this over the next few months or few years?
It's just going to continue to scale. As I say, it works, and if it works, then why change? When we use new technology, we have to abide by laws and regulations and compliance. They don't. They can jump ahead to how can we exploit this? How can we use it, like Faye said, to make fake IDs, to, when there's a data breach, to kind of to trawl through and parse all that data into usable format that I can use and exploit individuals and do what I want to do with it, to make money and have that power and control.
So let's do some advice then to try and get ahead of the fraudsters. What have we got? I've got a few notes here. To begin with, check your credit score. I guess that's a good one to see if anything's already happened.
Yeah, and there's a number of bureaus. So you might have, again, like I said, you might have one with your bank account, but that will be with one. And different organisations, this is where it gets frustrating, different organisations use different credit bureaus to do those checks. So just because it doesn't flag on your one doesn't mean it's not going to flag on someone else's one. So having a kind of broad sweep of as many of those bureaus as possible.
Should say Equifax, Experian and TransUnion are the three we should be checking.
Yes, 100%.
Right.
Wasn't sure if we could use the names, but thank you very much.
Absolutely.
So we've got a which guide on how to do it. And in most cases, I think in all of cases now, all three of them, there are kind of free versions available. And some of them will even email you once a month to remind you to check. And sometimes they will even email you to let you know something's changed. So yeah, it's well worth doing. And I think we can share that in the show notes, can't we?
Yeah, for sure. We'll pop some useful links in there. Faye, what else? What else should people be doing in the meantime?
So I know it gets boring almost saying this, but like you must set a strong, unique, complex password for every single account, and I know it's a pain. What's been a game changer for me is using a password manager, not just to store the passwords, but it actually suggests passwords as well. It just takes seconds, and it will suggest a completely random string of letters, numbers, symbols, etc., and then it will save it for you, and that's wonderfully easy. If you don't want to use that or you're nervous about doing so, you can use the 3 random words kind of passphrase method, where you literally just pick 3 completely random words that are unrelated to each other, and then you kind of insert some numbers and symbols in as well, perhaps kind of replacing some of the letters with them or putting them in between the words, for example.
And even Google does password management and things like
Exactly.
that, and it also looks for where your details might have been compromised as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's loads of free tools available, and while you're strengthening all your passwords and making sure they're all unique, turn on 2FA wherever it's available. This is two-factor authentication.
Yeah.
So this means that you're going to need to provide an extra piece of information that confirms who you are. So it might be that you have an authenticator app on your phone, or that you receive a short one-time passcode to your phone via SMS. That's always turn that on if that's an option, even if it's not on by default, but it's an option. Please turn it on, because it's always worth doing.
And also check your post as well, in case a letter comes and says you've opened a bank account and you're like, I have not opened a bank account.
Check your post, and if you're expecting a letter from an organisation and you don't receive it as well, that's another thing. It may have been redirected. So these things that you need to be aware. Check your statements on your on your phone, your device. If you still get the paper statements, still go through that as often as you can to look for that kind of activity. Checking letters. If, maybe the label's been peeled off or things like that of suspicious packages. They're just making sure that validating the address is genuine. All of those kinds of little things. Any kind of little trust your gut, I would say, 100%.
Well, we've learnt loads and plenty to take away as well from today. Faye, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And Steve, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to this podcast from Which, the UK's consumer champion. You can find plenty more advice about what we discussed today in the show notes. There you'll also find a link to become a Which member for 50% off the usual price, an offer exclusively available to you, our podcast listeners. Joining Which will not only give you access to all of our product reviews, our app, one-to-one personalised buying advice and every issue of Which magazine across the air, but you'll also be helping us to make life simpler, fairer and safer for everyone. Don't forget to hit subscribe wherever you're listening. That way you'll be notified whenever we release a new episode of Which Money, Which Shorts, or another podcast that we make for you. And if you want to get in touch with us, then follow us on social media. We're at Which UK, or you can drop us an email to podcasts@which.co.uk. See you next time.
If you're enjoying this podcast from us here at Which, then why not become a Which member? Right now, we've got a special offer, especially for podcast listeners, meaning you can choose any of our 3 membership tiers for 50% off the usual price. Starting at just £39.50 for a full year, you can get Which magazine delivered direct to your door. For the same price, you could also choose a digital Which subscription, giving you access to all of our product reviews, the Which app, and the digital edition of Which magazine. What's more, you'll also be able to use the Ask Which service for personalised one-to-one buying advice. Or why not get a full access Which subscription for just £49.50 for a full year? Don't forget, that's 50% off the usual price. To join Which or to find out more, just head to which.co.uk/podcast offer. That's which.co.uk/podcast offer, or click the link in the description for today's podcast for 50% off a Which annual subscription.